of the dawn, when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong, in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the bold are drowned in mournful cries. Oh, we dreamt of a home where the rivers run free. Now we walk on the ruins of what was meant to be, shattered hopes and broken streams.
Episode 18. The persecution of the Okorobians in the northern Awosa lands. Between 1965 and 1966, the Okorobians in the northern regions of Muguland faced escalating violence and persecution from the Awosas in the northern parts of Muguland. The once peaceful coexistence between the tribes in the north, west, and south of the nation turned nightmarish as distrust and hostility fueled by political upheaval engulfed their lives. By the time the Awosas in the north recovered from their shock and pain that resulted from the brutal massacre of many leaders of the Awosa extraction in the first and second coup to rock Muguland, they were ready to extract their pound of flesh on the Okorobians, who most of them held responsible for the one-sided carnage of the five majors. Without really meeting or planning in advance, spontaneous violence against Okorobians erupted in several parts of the northern Awosa lands, and the nation watched helpless as the horror escalated into what the Okorobians still refer to this day as the attempted genocide or extermination of their tribesmen by the Awosas. One harrowing story involved the family of Uwabuezes, whose home and shops in the north were set ablaze amidst chants of betrayal and revenge by rampaging Awosa youths. The father, a once respected member of the community, whose family had lived in the north for more than 25 years, could only watch in horror as years of hard work turned to ashes, a vivid metaphor for their shattered sense of belonging. In another instance, a successful Okorobian merchant, Jude Namani, was brutally attacked in the marketplace as he hawked his second-hand clothes, his goods looted and his livelihood destroyed. Seeing the danger to his personal safety, Jude abandoned his cart of merchandise and ran for his dear life, but by then it was too late. He was fatally struck on the side of his head by the sword of one of the Awosa rioters as he attempted to flee. He eventually bled to death right there in the middle of the marketplace, as the chanting crowd spit on him and threw pebbles on his convulsing body. These acts of violence weren't just physical, they were symbolic, representing a deep-rooted animosity and a desire to erase the presence of the Okorobians from the region. Another prominent Okorobian, Ukenwabara, a renowned tailor designer with a flourishing business in the north of more than 20 years, became another tragic victim. His fashion houses were razed, and he was brutally beheaded in the market square over an unfounded allegation of familial ties to one of the coup plotters in the original coup. Chief Princewill Igboanugo, a respected banker, also saw his life's work destroyed when his bank was looted and burned. Accusations of financing the Okorobia-led coup served as a pretext for this ruthless act. The case of Chief Ekene Iberaibe was equally heartbreaking. His transport company, a symbol of Okorobian enterprise in the north, west and south for many years, was targeted by rampaging Awosa mobs. In one afternoon of senseless act of vengeance, over 30 of his transportation vehicles were set ablaze, reflecting the deep-seated animosity towards the Okorobians. The crescendo of this violence was a tragic incident, where a group of Okorobian students was ambushed on their way to school, and 8 of them were brutally murdered without any assistance or help from bystanders or the police. This attack on children was a brutal reminder to everyone that the anger of the Awosa spared no one, not even the innocent. These events and many more violent acts against the Okorobians in many parts of the country, especially in the north, convinced many Okorobians that Muguland as a country was no longer a safe place for them. They pointed to the lackluster support from the Wongo government at the centre in Lasgidi, and the lip service the head of state continued to pay to the plight of the Okorobians around the country. The new head of state kept promising federal police and military protection for Okorobian lives and property, but essentially did nothing while they died on the streets and lost houses and properties they had gathered after many years of hard work in different parts of the country. These gory incidents of violence eventually compelled many Okorobians to seek safety in their ancestral eastern lands, ultimately igniting the mass emigration of Okorobians from the northern parts of Muguland in what became known in history books as the Okorobian Exoduses from different parts of Muguland.
Episode 19, the Aribu Accord that broke the Carmel's back. As the federal government at the center continued to dismantle the autonomy of the federal states and paid lip service to the pain and suffering of the Okorobians, the anger of the Okorobia people continued to mount. Their people continued to be massacred in the Awosa region in the continued reprisal for the Major's coup and Ironside's high-handedness, despite Awosa people now being in effective control of the central government, with Okorobians not posing any threats to them. The government of Wango that was supposed to douse the tension pretended the Okorobias were not facing any pogrom in Awosa region and continued to deny what the whole world could see and hear directly from the mouths of Okorobian returnees from the Awosa region. The Okorobias continued to feel that they were being treated unfairly and that the Wango government was not addressing their concerns.
In response to mounting pressure and complaints from his own people, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuma Ojugwu upped the ante and started to talk about refusing orders from the center, and clearly stated that the Okorobias may take the law into their hands and secede for the safety of their citizens if the federal government would not do something about their plight.
As the face-off between the federal government of General Wango and the Okorobia regional government led by Major General Ojugwu escalated, the world began to fear that a civil war was inevitable in the newly independent Muguland if there was no intervention to cool down the political temperature in the land. To calm frayed nerves, international observers prevailed on the federal government of Wango and the disgruntled leaders of the Okorobia region to sit down together and work out an arrangement that will satisfy everyone and avert any decisions on secession or war. After much persuasion, backroom negotiations and public posturing by the two sides, both Wango and Ojugwu eventually agreed to meet in the neutral neighboring country of Ganaga to discuss the salient issues and find acceptable solutions like gentlemen and officers. As the days to the Aribu confab drew near, Lieutenant Colonel Ojugwu gathered the best brains in Okorobia land together to come up with a comprehensive game plan on what to negotiate for in Aribu. They formed committees of experts to look at every area of the new structure to be proposed for Muguland and come up with areas the Okorobias can exploit to strengthen their case and devise strategies to get the best deals for their people at the event. This was in direct contrast to the preparation of the Wango government. Wango treated the upcoming conference as a place to reconnect with his old friends in the military, where they can discuss issues in a friendly atmosphere and reach general agreements as military officers. They had no game plan other than attending the conference and had no concrete objectives other than to find ways to appease and assuage the anger of Okorobias and the growing rebellion of Major General Ojugwu. Therefore, as it turned out, one side was very prepared for the conference, while the other side was very casual about the event. This was the state of play as the parties departed for Aribu Ganaga for the fateful conference that will continue to play a role in the history of Muguland for years. The different approaches of the principal parties also sowed the seeds for the tragic events that unfolded after the Aribu conference. Early in the new year, the much-anticipated peace conference was held in the city of Aribu Ganaga. Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuma Ojugwu and the Muguland head of state, Yakubu Wango, met with their delegation to discuss the issues.
We must stay focused on our agenda. This is our chance to secure a better future for Okorobia.
Let's not stress too much. We'll sort things out over a drink or two.
Throughout the 5 days conference, the Wango's Muguland delegation spent more time having fun, drinking, and getting entertained by women of easy virtues, while Ojugwu and his people stayed focused on the agenda of the conference and refused to join in the nightly parties organized by their host, Perfron Kurumba, the president of Ganaga at the time.
Gentlemen, let's enjoy the evening. The serious discussions can wait till tomorrow.
Many times, when committee sessions would drag into the night, the Muguland delegation would simply accept the proposals of the Okorobias just to get off serious business and move into the merrymaking mode of the conference, rather than keep arguing with the representatives of the Okorobias to get the best deal for their side. Eventually, after 7 days of negotiations, the conference resulted in an agreement known as the Aribu Accord, which aimed to address the grievances of the Okorobia region and end the crisis. Due to lack of appreciation of the consequences of whatever agreement was reached at this critical summit by the representatives of the federal government of Muguland, the Aribu Accord gave the regions more autonomy and allowed them to control their own resources. It also proposed a confederal system of government in which the regions would have more control over their affairs and the central government would be weaker. However, the Muguland government led by Major General Wango, on getting back home to face the insistence of Major General Ojugwu to implement the agreement, later reneged on the agreement made at Aribu, once it became clear that they had conceded too much to the Okorobias.
In an attempt to avoid following through on what was agreed at the summit, General Wango tried to explain that some of the terms in the Aribu Memorandum was not a legally binding agreement, but only a guidance for the parties to use in writing a binding agreement later.
This surprising stance by the Muguland government made Lieutenant Colonel Ojugwu very furious, and he accused the Wango government of making a fool of all the Okorobias. He personally challenged the integrity of Wango as an officer who was refusing to live up to his words, and signed document. He called a world conference and declared in a thundering voice, "On Aribu we stand," while punching the podium with his big fists. With eyes bulging with anger, Lieutenant Colonel Ojugwu looked around the packed hall and declared, "Okorobians will no longer be taken for fools." He then shared copies of the confidential Aribu Memorandum with all the people present to make his case, despite a previous agreement with Wango to keep the document between the parties.
Herbert Concrete, a seasoned reporter for the New York Journal, as one of the international press people present, asked Lieutenant Colonel Ojugwu what he would do if Major
General Wango continued to treat the terms of the accord as a non-binding guide rather than a legally binding contract. Ojugwu simply glared at him, signaled to his delegation at the conference, and they all stormed off the stage without giving an answer. On getting back to his headquarters in the governor's mansion, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuma Ojugwu called for a meeting of all the political, religious, traditional, and military leaders of the Okorobias to discuss matters arising from the betrayal of the Wango government over the Aribu Accord. Almost every one of the over 500 Okorobia top leaders from all walks of life present agreed that if Wango did not honor the agreement he signed in public, then Ojugwu must consider taking them out of the Muguland Union.
The few leaders who tried to caution everyone to take a deep breath and consider the consequences of secession before taking such an eventful action were shouted down and violently removed from the hall.
The die was cast, and Okorobias were adamant about leaving the Union, by peace or by war. Ojugwu and most of the Okorobia people believed that the Muguland government was not sincere in its commitment to the Aribu Memorandum, and that the Okorobia region would not be able to achieve its goals within a united Muguland.
Therefore, after a lot of soul-searching, with full understanding of what war would mean for my people, I declare that the people of the Okorobia region, in full exercise of their inalienable God-given rights to self-determination and freedom of association, will be seceding from the Muguland nation to form our own independent nation of Okorobia. I extend an open hand of friendship from the new Okoro nation to the people and government of Muguland. We stand ready for peace, but we are preparing to fight to the very last man to defend our territories. If the Muguland leaders choose to violate our sovereign territory or deny us our right to self-determination from a country that no longer serves the interests of the Okorobia, I order all Okorobias outside of the new Okorobia nation to come home immediately, since I cannot guarantee their safety in a country that no longer cares about them.
Strangely, for a few days after Ojugwu declared the formation of the new Republic of Okorobia, there was no answer from the federal government of Muguland. Everywhere appeared calm on the Muguland side, while the Okorobias continued congratulating themselves on finally getting a country of their own. Yet, everyone knew that this was just a period of calm before the terrible storm that cost millions of lives on both sides.
Following the coup that brought General Wango to power, the reprisal attacks on Okorobians in the Awosa region of Muguland, and the disproportionate appointment of officers from the Awosa region over the Okorobia region, The Okorobia people felt that their interests were not being represented by the new government, and tensions continued to simmer. When another round of pogroms occurred in the Awosa land after the new government had reassured them of protection, a group of elders representing the clans in Okorobia land decided to hold another town hall meeting to discuss the future of their people. The meeting was held in the center of the town of Ugane, under the shade of a giant baobab tree. The elders sat on mats arranged in a circle, with their walking sticks leaning against the tree trunk. The town hall meeting was a colorful event, with elders from different clans dressed in their traditional attire, and the red-capped chiefs strutting in full regalia. The air was thick with the smell of roasted yams and the sound of drums and flutes. The elders sat in silence for a few moments, taking in the scene and collecting their thoughts. Kola nuts were shared round with the best ugbas in the land. Then, a middle-aged, highly combative, idealistic Igwe from Oshimili Kingdom named Chief Eze Orizu stood up and addressed the group. He spoke in a deep, rumbling voice that commanded attention. "My fellow elders," Chief Orizu began, "we have come together today to discuss the future of our people. We have all seen the suffering and the injustice that has been inflicted upon our tribe. We have been marginalized and oppressed, and our voices have not been heard. It is time for us to take action." The other elders nodded in agreement, and some murmured their assent. Chief Ease continued, "We have patiently watched as our children and brothers who had ventured to the Awosa region were being massacred on a daily basis with no support from the Wango government. Just last week, my junior brother, who had lived in Kano for over 20 years, had to run for his life from the Awosa region with nothing but just one portmanteau, and even that was seized from him by bandits on the road. I hear tales of woes from everywhere in Oshimili land and beyond. We cannot continue like this. Our son, Colonel Chukwuma, has also told us that the Wango government has refused to honor the agreement they all signed in Aribu. We have tried everything humanly possible to stay with our Awosa and Yorubawa brothers in this useless Muguland, and it's not working. Therefore, I propose that we secede from this new country that has been imposed upon us by the white man. We shall form our own nation, where we can govern ourselves and ensure that our interests are represented." The other elders listened attentively, and some began to speak up in support of the proposal. Many of the high chiefs and Igwes gathered in the assembly talked about the injustices that had been inflicted upon their people, the lack of representation in the government, and the need to protect their cultural heritage, as well as lives and property. As the discussion continued and it looked like everyone was ready to leave the Union of Muguland by force, a new character, a 62-year-old elder and highly decorated veteran who had fought in the Burma War, named Chief Obina Obieke from Abagana Kingdom, spoke up against the proposal to declare secession by force. He had seen war and the devastation of war. He knew his people do not have the numbers or the equipment to fight a prolonged war with the huge Muguland nation, of which they Okorobians formed less than 20% of the population. He counseled the elders against going to war, arguing that violence would only lead to more suffering and bloodshed. "My people, we are the leaders of the people of Okorobia Republic, and we should not react the way we all feel about the provocations from the other tribes in Muguland. We should not rush into a decision that may ultimately lead to war." Chief Obina concluded his unpopular remark by saying, "We should try harder to find a peaceful solution to the legitimate issues we have been discussing for hours, rather than resorting to violent secession." However, most of the other elders were not swayed by Obina's arguments. Most of the other high chiefs and Igwes gathered at the assembly mocked him. Some yelled at him for being a lackey of the Awosas, and some called him a coward who probably ran away from the battlefield in Burma. Many questioned his motive and pointed out the fact that he had recently visited Lasgidi to meet with some of the officers from the Awosa region. They accused him of having been compromised by the corrupt regime. Most saw him as a coward who was afraid of war, and they all dismissed his concerns. Some even spit on the floor in disgust at his hesitation to demand for the rights of his people by force if necessary. The few members of the delegation who tried to come to the defense of Chief Obina were shouted down and told to sit down or leave if their stomachs were too weak to confront the Awosas and the Yorubawas who have turned them into third-class citizens in their own fatherland. "Peaceful solutions are for the weak," one elder said. "We must be ready to fight for our independence, no matter the cost." The other elders nodded in agreement, and some murmured their assent. Despite the objections of Obina and a few of the elders, it was clear that most of the elders were for the forceful secession option. They would secede from the new country and form their own nation, which they would call Okorobia Nation. However, they also knew that their decision would not be accepted peacefully by the government, and they were prepared to fight for their independence. "We must be ready to defend ourselves," Chief Ease said. We must escalate the training of our brave young men and women warriors to be ready to defend their fatherland to the very last man. Okorobians are legendary warriors, and we must prepare for battle. Most of the other elders nodded, and some murmured their assent, while those who would have preferred a peaceful solution hung their heads, having been shamed into silence by the belligerent crowd of elders. The decision to go to war was not made lightly, but the elders knew that it was necessary for the survival and prosperity of their people. They hugged each other and shook hands, their faces serious and determined. Finally, Major General Chukwuma Ojugwu, the appointed military governor of the Okorobia region, stepped down from the high table and addressed the elders of the clans assembled. Our elders, I thank you for your deliberations and love for our motherland. From what you have been discussing for almost 6 hours now, it is clear that all the clans have decided that secession of our region from the Republic of Muguland is the only option left for us as a people, he said in a booming voice. Then Major General Ojugwu added an ominous note. I understand and agree this is a righteous course of action, since I do not see myself accepting the authority of the murderous government of General Wango and the continued persecution of our people. However, it is important for every Okorobian represented here to understand that, if secession is the collective decision of the Okorobians, then I will gladly lead you. But you should know in advance that all I can promise you on the way to freedom is sorrow, tears, and blood. We are not children, and so we must all know that, like the stubborn Pharaoh who refused to let our ancestors in Israel go in the days of old, the Muguland nation is not going to let us go peacefully, and we must therefore be ready to bleed and die to claim what is ours. Are you all ready for that? The elders looked at each other, taken aback by the general's very ominous words. They had not expected such a sobering statement from someone they had hoped would lead them to victory. After a brief silence, Chief Ijamanzi from Orlu Kingdom shouted, "Yes, we are prepared to die to the last man." Then another chief echoed him, and within minutes all the chiefs started shouting, "Yes, we are ready!" Then Major General looked around the packed hall and nodded. "Very well then," the general continued. "If you are willing to pay the price for your freedom, then I will be with you every step of the way. We will fight with all our might, and we will not give up until we have achieved our goals. Our brave Okoro warriors and I will fight to the last man if need be. I give you my word, there would be no retreat and no surrender, and we all will be ready to fight to the last man." The elders nodded solemnly, realizing the gravity of the situation they had just agreed to. They are not fools. They knew that going to war was not going to be easy, and that there would be many sacrifices along the way. They just did not realize the magnitude of the terrible price they were about to pay in blood for the decision to forcefully fight for their God-given right to determine and control their destiny as a nation. "We understand," Chief Ezorizu said, speaking for all of them. "We are prepared to do whatever it takes to secure the future of our people." The other elders nodded in agreement, and some murmured their assent. With that, the assembly of elders came to a close. The elders dispersed, each returning to their respective clans to begin preparations for the coming inevitable conflict. The air was thick with the scent of roasted yams and the sound of drums and flutes, signaling the start of a new era in the history of the Okorobia tribe.
With no official warning, public response, or public entreaties for Lieutenant Colonel Ojugwu and his Okorobia people to recant their declaration of secession or come for further discussions to iron out the issues, the Muguland military, led by Major General Wango, launched Operation Lion's Claw against the secessionist Okorobia nation in the east. As the federal troops advanced towards the new Okorobia nation territory, the Okorobian army fired the first shots at a federal roadblock in Mekam, a small town in the newly formed state of Crosswater, a state that the federal government considered part of Muguland nation. The battle lasted for hours, resulting in several casualties on both sides. With this first salvo, Major General Wango mobilized their forces for full-scale war under the cover of Operation Lion's Claw. The operation started in the early morning of a winter day with devastating airstrikes on the new Okorobia nation's capital of Enugu, destroying major infrastructure and killing hundreds of people in one day. Blood was being shed on all sides. After a lot of posturing by all sides, things had finally fallen apart, and brothers were now officially at war. The news of the battle quickly spread, and the country was thrown into chaos as the Muguland government officially declared war on the new Okorobia nation. This marked the beginning of a bloody civil war of brothers that would last for 3 years, claiming millions of lives, including over 800,000 children, most of whom died of starvation, and left the country deeply divided along tribal lines unto this day. The Chronicles of Muguland continues in Brothers at War.
We were children of the dawn when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the boy